Hi, this is Miss Slitton, and this is lunchtime after our lovely fire drill. And we are on the last part of Big Idea 2, that biological systems utilize energy and molecular building blocks to grow, to reproduce, and to maintain homeostasis. And we are on 2E, the last one, that many biological processes involved in growth, reproduction, and homeostasis include temporal aspects. What does temporal mean? Has something to do with what? Time, yeah. It's all in the timing. On growth at different stages, when reproduction occurs, when you think about hormone regulation and circadian rhythms, or if you just think about when our sleep and wake cycle, migration, all of those have to do with timing. And so, what is apoptosis? Do you remember that? What is apoptosis? Yeah, process of programmed cell death or cell suicide, and an orderly disposal of cells that need to die. If DNA has sustained too many injuries, if a cell is infected with a virus, cells need to be removed from body parts. We talked about fingers forming. That might be another time that you need to do apoptosis. Or if it's old and its time has come. You obviously don't want to do that at the wrong time, right? Reproduction, you have external fertilization. That has a lot of timing because you have to release the eggs and then you have to release the sperm so it will fertilize it at the appropriate time. If you release the sperm too early or too late, and it's a very coordinated effort. Same thing for internal fertilization. It's funny because they're turtles. That for internal fertilization, those are when two body parts are coming together at that point, and so that has some serious timing involved. We actually don't have to do reproduction anymore, but when we talk about the phases of ejaculation, so that the sperm is, remember the whole point of having internal fertilization, the whole point of a penis is to get it closer to the egg, to be more specific and more targeted in your reproduction. Other aspects of that, we talked about the different hormones, and follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Guys, I'm giving a review today, so you just can't talk in here today. You can sit, just not talk. That is triggered by gonadotropic releasing hormone, and we talked about in the, just nice and quiet. If you want to come in here, you just can't talk today because we're doing a review. We talked about follicle stimulating hormone for egg development, but that also works on sperm development and spermatogenesis. And luteinizing hormone causes ovulation in the female, but for males it triggers testosterone release. We went over the menstrual cycle. Here's a little short review of that as well. And the menstrual cycle is good because it's an example of both positive and negative feedback. If you remember, in positive feedback, the estrogen level has to get high enough, right? And the estrogen is coming out of the ovaries, and the ovaries are releasing from the follicle, and that's giving positive feedback on both the hypothalamus and the pituitary, because if that's at a high enough level, it will trigger ovulation, and you'll have much gonadotropic releasing hormone. Then you will have luteinizing hormone that gets released from the pituitary gland, and you don't want to release that egg until the uterine lining is thick enough. Also, you need to have feedback, and there's timing involved in if the egg is fertilized or not. If it's not fertilized, then you're going to go ahead and have your corpus luteum is going to atrophy, and you're going to have the cycle start all over again. All right, and that is spelled out here, and we went over it in class as well, and here's some other pictures of it. Here's ovulation. Eggs are usually viable for a certain length of time, and you don't want to put all this energy into releasing an egg unless there is sperm that is near it to fertilize it. Then moving on into development. We said having full developmental potential, you are totipotent. For some organisms, the very first cleavage determines the cellular fate. For us, we can get up to several divisions before our cells lose their totipotency. And we talked about that the DNA is the same in all of those cells, but what's different in a cell that sends it down its developmental pathway? Do you remember? Look at the reds and the greens. They're very quiet. They don't remember. It's what's in the cytoplasm, right? We talked about transcription factors, and that'll influence which of the DNA is transcribed. And we talked about morphogenesis and morphogens. Do you remember that? Okay, and that has to be timed out. We talked about the anterior, posterior, right, is determined. Sperm penetrates, that's the anterior end. The opposite one, right, be the posterior. Where the yolk is, that starts the developmental pathway of the ventral portion of the organism. Lack of yolk is the animal pole and the dorsal. Lots of timing involved in morphogenesis. You have cells moving, taking on body parts. What were the two big systems that are involved in control in our bodies? Nervous and the endocrine system. So the nervous system, it has to have cells growing towards those target tissues. They're competing to get there during development. And your hormones are going to dictate your development as well, like your growth hormone. We talked about, here you can see sperm fertilizing the egg, totipotent, the morula. We talked about the blastocyst, right? The blastula, and we talked about that infolding in order to form the archenteron and the gut of the organism. And again, timing. I think I can skip through this part. Okay. Take a look at this. Instead of me talking, because you're being awful quiet, why doesn't the person with the darkest shirt explain this slide right here? You're so far away from anybody. Okay, go ahead. Darkest shirt. Go ahead. Explain to your neighbor. Better than me talk at you. Okay, we good? So one tissue influences another tissue in its development, and we talked about what's getting released, like things like segmentation, and morphogenesis is the emergence of new tissues. Morphogens are proteins in a gradient for segmentation, and we talked about transcription factors. I think we hit that. Homeotic genes, the homeotic genes are coding for proteins, and those proteins are probably going to be transcription factors that are controlling the next set of genes that needs to be turned on. Here's an example of abnormal development due to the wrong genes turned on in the wrong place at the wrong time. Here is normal fruit fly, and here they have a mutation. So the fruit fly has a leg instead of an antenna right here. We looked at similarities in pattern formation, whether you're a mouse or a fruit fly. The same genes for the anterior region and the posterior regions are turned on. Okay, and what percent of your genes do you share? Take a look at that. That was from 23andMe. All right, and development timing for birth. Okay, that's a big deal to get everything ready, because when the baby comes out, what else needs to be ready for that baby? What do you have to do to a baby when it comes out? You have to feed it. Okay, so what's one way, what's an adaptation that mammals have to make sure that there's going to be food there for the baby? Okay, so prolactin is going to make sure you make the milk. Good. Oxytocin. What does oxytocin do? Yeah, the uterus contracts to push out the baby, but that also makes what? Milk come out. So that's a good way to handle the timing of that, so the food is ready for the baby. Let's talk about transpiration. That's the evaporation of water out open stomata. You want there's benefit to that water evaporating, right? Because you're cooling the plant in the hot day. But sometimes you need to close those stomata if you're losing too much water, or like in deserts when they leave them open at night and they close them during the daytime. All of that are more examples of timing. Here's some open and closed stomata. Thigmotropism, do you remember what that one was? When we talked about plant hormones? So you're coming in contact with an object, and so the cells on the outside are going to be doing more, are going to be elongating the ones that are coming in contact with something or not, right? And that helps them spin around and helps for support. Timing if you're going to catch a fly. If you're like an organism where it has to contract, like a Venus flytrap, because you have to contract fast enough that it won't escape. Morphogenesis is a response to a stimulus of the whole plant, not just one area of that plant. Nastic and sleep. Communication requires timing, right? Knowing when to communicate and how to communicate. We learned about the bee dance, and I think the bee dance was on your last test, wasn't it? Last practice test? Did you get that one right? It was Trixie. All right. Cellular division, all about timing, when to make more cells and when not to make cells. You guys are still growing, right? I'm done growing, so I don't make any more cells. If I did, maybe I had something like acromegaly, right? Or a disease like cancer. So timing, you need to have the right chemicals telling that cell to divide and when not to divide. And we talked about cytokinins, we talked about CDKs, right? And activating them so that you move on to the next stage of the cell cycle. So controlled by internal and external signals. It could inhibit or stimulate an event. Growth hormones are an example of something that would stimulate an event. We talked about checkpoints, so that if things aren't going well, then that cell can commit apoptosis. If it can't repair it, and here's the apoptosis slide, we already mentioned that. If you do not repair your DNA, or for instance, you lose a little bit at the ends of the chromosomes, these are obviously not genes that are expressed, but those telomeres, and what's happening in some cases of cancer is that those chromosomes aren't becoming shorter each time. You're continuing to have the telomerase activity to keep the chromosomes long, and so it becomes an immortal cell. We talked about the two genes that are critical towards the timing of the cell cycle, proto-oncogenes and the tumor suppressor genes. So proto-oncogenes, they're in powerful positions. We talked about RAS is like stepping on the what? Gas. And it says go cell cycle, go cell cycle, go. And that's fine if that cell is supposed to reproduce. But if not, hopefully then tumor suppressor genes come in and stop it. And it's the failure of both of those. When the cell cycle is promoted when it shouldn't be, and the failure of the tumor suppressor genes to do their job. We talked about P53, right? And if those two combinations, those two failures will lead to cancer. Right, here's some more timing. Why do I have this picture in here for timing?
The pineal gland secretes melatonin, which helps regulate like circadian,
yes?
Circadian rhythms, day versus night.
That was Weston, everybody, bringing it home. Okay, yeah, so you're able to tell your sleep and wake cycle, and remember your melatonin levels, when you get exposed to light, then the melatonin levels go off. That's a really good way to maintain homeostasis and to know when to sleep. But that's also related to sexual reproduction as well, to know what season it is, to know whether it's time to reproduce or not. Boy, I put a whole big abstract of two different things. I must have thought that was really important. And disease is related to it. Okay, behavior. Behavior here is, you know, they're hitting each other, but behavior would be behaviors towards.
Ariel Markowitz, you're needed in the counseling office. Ariel Markowitz,
They did not say
please report
Davidoff.
to the counseling office.
Were you scared at first? She didn't spit out her food though. Okay, so we talked about timing and behavior, and you think about some of the behavior that you have, whether it's nest building or foraging or finding a mate or any of those types of things. Homeostasis, maintaining a constant internal environment. even though your external or internal environment could be changing. We talked about the importance of metabolism and our energy coming from the sun. Living things are organized, they're made of cells, they what? Acquire materials. So you need to, there's certain times when you can acquire certain materials for energy. Signaling, when to secrete those pheromones. If you come in too soon, you might end up, like an insect or something, they might be like, I didn't give you the green light to come and, reproduce with me, now I'm going to eat you. Okay, that could happen if you're not, if the timing is off. Pheromones are then signals between two different organisms. Hormones are signals between two different cells. Do you need more insulin at this point? Is that the timing because it's during the daytime and you need to increase your sugar storage, or do you need glucagon because you need more blood sugar? You could go into some sort of seizure on either end, right? Having too much glucose or not having enough glucose. Responding to stimuli, again, timing events. Reproducing, we have already talked about timing. What is binary fission? Who does that? Prokaryotes, good. Why do I have this camel here? Distal convoluted tubules. Okay, so this could have been excretion if he's in the desert, right? He wants to conserve water. Also, there's a countercurrent exchange in his nose, his blood pathway versus the air, yeah, so that he recovers as much moisture as he possibly can. Growth and development, we've hit that when sperm unites with the egg. Adaptation is a mechanism for evolution, which is change over, here's another word, time, okay. Timing of young, and oh my gosh, we finished it. That was the end of Big Idea 2. That's good. So I'm going to stop this. 17 minutes of fun.